There was a time when you sang. In the shower, in the car, at a kitchen table on a Saturday morning. You stopped, gradually, for reasons that felt reasonable. And something changed in your body that you were never told about. There is a person in every choir who never seems to catch colds. Their secretory immunoglobulin. A. The antibody that lines the respiratory tract, the body's first defense against airborne pathogens, is measurably higher than in non-singers. The mechanism is the mechanical vibration of their own larynx, stimulating the vagus nerve twice a week for an hour at a time. That person did not stop singing. You did. And the difference is not talent or discipline. It is what the vibration was doing to both of your bodies. Singing is a vagal stimulation protocol that every tradition in human history discovered without knowing what to call it. There is a molecule your sinuses release at 15 times the resting rate when you sing. A vasodilator that opens your airways and blood vessels simultaneously. And there is a finding that singing raises your pain threshold more than listening to music does, because the physical act of producing sound, not passively receiving it, drives the endorphin response. Both come later. Start with what happens in the throat, because the physics there explains everything that follows. Your voice is fluid dynamics applied to air, applied to tissue. What you experience as a sustained musical note is a series of tiny pressure explosions happening faster than the ear can resolve individually. Mucous membrane snapping together and apart hundreds of times per second inside a tube, roughly the diameter of a pencil. Here is how. Your larynx houses two vocal folds, strips of layered tissue stretched across the airway, each one roughly 15 to 20 millimeters long. When you sing, muscles in the larynx draw the folds together until they nearly touch, leaving a narrow slit called the glottis. As exhaled air passes through this gap, Bernoulli effect takes over. The principle that fluid velocity and pressure are inversely related, first described in 1738 to explain water flow in pipes. Fast-moving air between the folds creates a pressure drop. The lower pressure pulls the folds together. They collide. Air pressure builds below the closed folds. When the subglottal pressure exceeds the force holding them together, they blow apart. The cycle repeats. 110 collisions per second for the A below middle C. 220 for the A above. Over 1,000 for a soprano singing high C. Each collision generates a pressure pulse that propagates outward as a sound wave at 343 meters per second. You can feel this. Place your fingers on your throat while singing a low note. The vibration under your fingertips is the vocal folds cycling through their open-close pattern at the fundamental frequency of the note. Raise the pitch and the vibration frequency increases. Lower it and it decreases. The vibration is not a side effect of the voice. It is the voice. Well, and this is where the physics becomes pharmacology. Because the resonance cavities above the larynx, the pharynx, the oral cavity, the nasal passages, the paranasal sinuses, do something when they vibrate that has nothing to do with shaping your voice. Your paranasal sinuses continuously synthesize nitric oxide, the molecule that dilates airways and blood vessels simultaneously. At rest, the NO diffuses slowly from the sinus epithelium into the nasal airway. When you hum or sing, the oscillating air pressure created by the resonance of your voice in the sinus cavities dramatically accelerates this release. John Lundberg at the Karolinska Institute measured the increase, 15 times the resting output, not 15%, 15 times. Every hummed note, every sung phrase that resonates in the nasal and sinus cavities drives a bolus of nitric oxide into the airstream that enters the lower airways with the next inhalation. Lundberg found the effect by accident. He was studying nasal NO in sinusitis patients and included a humming test to assess sinus ventilation, expecting it to be a diagnostic tool, not a pharmacological event. The spike was so large he rechecked the equipment. The measurement was correct. The sinuses were responding to the vibration by releasing their stored nitric oxide at 15 times the baseline rate. That detail, the researcher rechecking the instrument because the number seemed impossible, is the moment this became pharmacology rather than acoustics for me. The sinuses were not just ventilating, they were dispensing a vasodilator on demand, triggered by sound. Subsequent work confirmed that the effect scaled with the intensity and duration of the vocalization. Humming produced the baseline 15-fold increase. Sustained singing, which generates stronger pressure oscillations in the sinus cavities because the acoustic output is greater, produced even higher peaks in some subjects. The frequency of the note mattered. Notes whose fundamental frequency or harmonics matched the resonant frequency of the individual sinus cavities produced the strongest nitric oxide release, because acoustic resonance amplifies the pressure oscillations that drive the gas from the epithelium into the airstream. Every person's sinuses have slightly different resonant frequencies, which means every person has specific notes that maximize their own nitric oxide output. Notes they are likely drawn to without knowing why, because the body registers the vasodilatory response as pleasure. Nitric oxide enters the bronchioles and the pulmonary vasculature with each breath. In the bronchioles, it relaxes smooth muscle through the guanylate cyclase pathway. Airways widen, resistance drops, more air reaches the gas exchange surfaces. In the pulmonary blood vessels, it dilates the vasculature. More blood reaches the alveoli at the moment more air is arriving. Oxygen transfer improves. Warmth and openness that regular singers describe in their chest after singing. The specific physical sensation of the chest feeling more spacious, the breath feeling deeper and easier, is not imagination. It is nitric oxide-mediated bronchodilation and vasodilation in the pulmonary circulation. The singing drove the chemistry. The chemistry opened the airways. A person who hums while cooking, who sings in the shower, who vocalizes in the car. Each of these activities is driving a 15-fold increase in sinus nitric oxide output for the duration of the vocalization. The effect is immediate and transient, present during singing, and for a period afterward, absent when the singing stops. But consider the cumulative exposure. A person who sings for 20 minutes in the morning shower, hums for 10 minutes while making breakfast, sings along to the radio for 15 minutes in the car. That person has received 45 minutes of enhanced nitric oxide delivery before arriving at work. Their bronchioles have been dilated for 45 minutes. Their pulmonary vasculature has been opened for 45 minutes. Their oxygen transfer efficiency has been elevated for 45 minutes. A non-singer breathing identical air in identical conditions received none of it. The difference is not dramatic in any single moment. Across years, it is the difference between a respiratory system that receives regular pharmacological support and one that does not. Next mechanism operates through direct neural contact, and it connects the voice to the heart. Vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve, running from the brainstem through the neck and into the thorax and abdomen, passes directly alongside the larynx. The superior laryngeal branch and the recurrent laryngeal branch innervate the muscles of the vocal folds themselves. When the vocal folds vibrate during singing, the mechanical vibration propagates through the surrounding tissue to the vagal nerve fibers running adjacent to the larynx. This is not indirect stimulation, not the calming effect of pleasant music, not the psychological benefit of an enjoyable activity. It is direct mechanical stimulation of nerve fibers by tissue vibration. The vagus nerve is being physically agitated by the oscillation of the structures it runs alongside, at the frequency of whatever note the singer is producing. Vagal afferent stimulation activates the parasympathetic nervous system. Heart rate decreases, blood pressure drops. Heart rate variability increases. The beat-to-beat variation that indicates healthy autonomic flexibility. Cortisol output decreases as the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis responds to the parasympathetic signal. Shift is measurable within minutes of beginning to sing. A person who walks into a choir rehearsal, carrying the sympathetic load of a stressful day. Elevated heart rate, constricted vasculature, suppressed digestion, cortisol still circulating from the afternoon's demands, begins shifting toward parasympathetic dominance from the first sustained note, not from the social pleasure of seeing friends, not from the psychological relief of doing something enjoyable. From the mechanical vibration of tissue adjacent to the vagus nerve, the nerve does not know why you are singing. It responds to the vibration the way a guitar string responds to being plucked. Because the physics of the stimulus matches the physics of the response, Choir singers report this consistently. The specific sensation of arriving tense and leaving calm, of the body settling during the first few songs in a way that feels physical rather than emotional. The settling is physical. The vagal stimulation is driving the parasympathetic shift before the social bonding or the musical pleasure has time to develop. The calm arrives with the first held note, because the nerve responds to the first vibration. By the end of a 90-minute rehearsal, the singer has received 90 minutes of intermittent vagal stimulation, a duration that exceeds any clinical vagal nerve stimulation protocol currently in use. None of that prepared me for what Bjorn Vikhoff measured at the University of Gothenburg in 2013 when he monitored the heart rate variability of choir singers during a rehearsal. Their hearts synchronized, not metaphorically. On the heart rate variability monitors, the cardiac rhythms of individual singers entrained to a shared frequency, their heart rates rising and falling together, locked into phase by the shared breathing patterns and shared vocal production that choir singing requires. When the choir breathed together to begin a phrase, their heart rates decelerated together. When they sustained a long note, their cardiac rhythms tracked each other beat by beat. Vikhoff had documented cardiac entrainment across a group of people, their hearts beating together, synchronized through vagal mechanisms driven by the physical act of singing identical phrases at identical tempo. The physics of coupled oscillation, the principle governing pendulum clocks on a shared beam, was operating between human cardiovascular systems connected not by a wooden beam, but by shared acoustic production and synchronized respiration. The singing was the coupling medium. The hearts were the oscillators. Choir members would not have known this was happening. What they would have felt, what every choir singer has felt, is the specific sensation of a group locking in. The moment during a rehearsal when the separate voices stop being separate and become one sound. The physical sense that something has shifted in the room, that the effort has decreased and the result has improved, that the group is grieving as a single organism. That sensation is cardiac entrainment arriving. The moment when the individual autonomic rhythms synchronize through the shared vagal stimulation of singing together. The feeling of unity is not poetic, it is physiological. The hearts are in phase with each other. Let that register. A room full of people singing one melody at one tempo are running synchronized vagal stimulation through their own larynges, producing cardiac entrainment measurable on a heart rate monitor, driven by the fluid dynamics of air passing through tissue. The hymn at the funeral, the anthem at the stadium, the carol at the school concert, each one a distributed vagal stimulation session that synchronized the hearts of everyone in the room who was singing. The people who were only listening did not entrain. The entrainment required the vibration. It required the voice. Synchronized hearts are the mechanical effect. The chemical effect runs alongside it, and it explains why the bond that forms in a choir feels different from other social bonds. Robin Dunbar at Oxford measured the next layer. After choir rehearsals, oxytocin levels in singers were significantly elevated, more so than after equivalent social activities that did not involve singing. Dunbar tested the comparison carefully: social conversation of equivalent duration, group exercise of equivalent physical effort, group activities with equivalent emotional engagement. Singing produced the largest oxytocin response in every comparison. Mechanism runs through multiple concurrent pathways. Vagal stimulation elevates oxytocin through brainstem, hypothalamic connections, the nucleus of the solitary tract, receiving vagal afferent input, projects to the paraventricular nucleus of the hypothalamus where oxytocin-producing neurons reside. Synchronized breathing between singers generates co-regulation effects, autonomic entrainment driven by shared respiratory rhythm, and shared vocal production activates neural circuits associated with coordinated physical action. Circuits that evolved for cooperative labor, and that fire whenever humans perform synchronized physical behavior. Singing is the only common human behavior that combines synchronized breathing, vagal stimulation, shared physical effort, acoustic coordination, and rhythmic entrainment in a single act. Each of those pathways independently contributes to oxytocin release. Running all five simultaneously produces a bonding signal that no single activity matches. This is why choir singers report the formation of social bonds faster and stronger than comparable group activities. The chemistry is running at a higher intensity than any other social behavior drives. Trust that builds in a choir over weeks and months. The feeling that these people are somehow closer than other social groups, that the bond is different from friendships formed over coffee or shared interests, is partly oxytocin, mediated social bonding generated by the shared vagal stimulation and respiratory synchronization. The chemistry is building the bond. The singers experience the bond. They credit the shared interest in music. The music was the vehicle. The chemistry was the mechanism. Now, the immune system. Because the vagal stimulation and cortisol suppression that singing generates have measurable consequences for how well the body fights infection. Stephen Clift and Grenville Hancock at Canterbury Christ Church University ran longitudinal studies of choir singers over multiple years, tracking immune markers alongside matched control groups engaged in equivalent social activities without singing. Regular singers showed 3 consistent changes: lower salivary cortisol, higher secretory immunoglobulin A, and lower rates of upper respiratory infection. Not marginally lower infection rates. Consistently, measurably lower, across flu seasons, across years, across the normal variation of pathogen exposure that a life in a community involves. The immune advantage was cumulative. Singers who had been in choirs for years showed stronger II responses than recent joiners, suggesting that the vagal stimulation protocol builds immune resilience over time rather than merely providing acute protection. Control groups with equivalent social engagement, but without singing, showed no comparable immune changes. The singing itself was driving the effect, and the effect was dose-dependent. More singing, more sessions, more years, stronger immune parameters. Secretory II is the specific antibody that matters. It coats the mucosal surfaces of the respiratory tract, nose, throat, bronchi, and neutralizes pathogens before they can establish infection. Higher III means more antibody molecules per square centimeter of respiratory mucosa. The choir singer who never catches colds is running a measurably better defended respiratory tract, and the defense was built by the vibration of their own larynx activating the vagus nerve, which suppressed the cortisol that suppresses IIA production. Chain is specific. Singing leads to vagal stimulation, which drives parasympathetic activation, which suppresses cortisol, which releases the suppression of IAA production, which raises mucosal antibody levels, which improves respiratory defense. Remove any link and the chain breaks. The singing is the first link. You see, the person who says they feel healthier since joining a choir is not reporting a placebo effect. They are reporting an immunological change produced by a neuroendocrine cascade, initiated by mechanical vibration of tissue in their throat. Singing vibrates more than the larynx. When you produce a sustained note, the resonance of the sound within the body's cavities generates vibration in the chest wall, the rib cage, the sternum, and the bones of the skull. These are not metaphorical vibrations. They are measurable mechanical oscillations of tissue and bone at the frequencies of the notes being produced. During low-pitched singing, the bass and baritone range, roughly 80 to 200 Hz, the chest cavity resonates strongly. The rib cage, the sternum, and the thoracic vertebrae vibrate at the fundamental frequency and its lower harmonics. A bass singer sustaining a low note at 100 Hz is vibrating their entire chest wall at 100 cycles per second. You can feel the vibration with your hand on your sternum, the bone buzzes under your palm, and the sensation extends through the rib cage into the back. During higher-pitched singing, the resonance shifts upward. The head cavities vibrate more strongly, the skull bones conduct the vibration, and the facial bones surrounding the sinuses oscillate at the frequencies of the notes. Singers describe the sensation as placement, the feeling that a high note lives in the forehead, or behind the eyes, or in the top of the skull. The sensation is acoustically accurate. The vibration is physically present in the bones the singer is describing. Touch the bridge of your nose while humming a high note, and you will feel it. Across a song with melodic range, the resonance moves through the body. Chest on the low notes, head on the high notes, throat and neck in the middle register. A 3-minute song with a 2-octave range gives the body a full-body vibration sequence that stimulates different tissue regions as the frequency changes. Physics of this mechanical stimulation relates to therapeutic ultrasound, used clinically to promote tissue healing, reduce inflammation, and increase local blood flow. Frequencies differ. Mechanism is shared. Periodic mechanical deformation of tissue at consistent frequencies increases cellular metabolism and stimulates repair processes. The vagus nerve stimulated by laryngeal vibration. Nitric oxide driven from the sinuses at 15 times resting output. Cortisol suppressed, III rising. Hearts synchronizing across a room through shared breath. Endorphins entering the bloodstream from sustained vocal effort. Every one of these mechanisms has been described so far in the context of group singing. Now the question, what happens when you sing alone? Everything described so far. The nitric oxide release, the vagal stimulation, the cortisol suppression, the resonance, operates independently of whether anyone is listening. A person singing alone in the car is still mechanically stimulating the vagus nerve through laryngeal vibration. Still driving 15 times the normal sinus nitric oxide output. Still resonating their chest cavity at the frequency of the song. Still running the cortisol suppression that maintains IEA levels. The physiological benefits are not contingent on an audience, not contingent on a choir, not contingent on musical skill, not contingent on pitch accuracy. They are contingent on the act of vocalizing. Car singer arrives at their destination in a measurably different physiological state from the person who drove in silence or listened to a podcast. Lower cortisol, higher vagal tone, more nitric oxide in the pulmonary circulation. Elevated endorphins. The commute was not wasted time. It was a vagal stimulation session the person administered without knowing it. The shower singer runs an identical protocol in an acoustic environment that amplifies the voice through hard tile reflections, making it sound richer and more resonant, encouraging longer notes and more sustained vocalization. The bathroom acoustics are not just flattering the voice. They are increasing the duration and intensity of the vagal stimulation. Think about what this means. Anyone who decided their voice was not good enough to sing, who was told as a child to mouth the words, who was laughed at for singing off-key, who gradually stopped vocalizing because the social cost of being heard seemed higher than the pleasure of making sound. That person stopped administering a vagal stimulation protocol that their cardiovascular and immune systems were relying on. The quality of the voice was never the relevant variable, the vibration was. A badly sung note stimulates the vagus nerve with identical mechanical efficiency to a beautifully sung one. The nerve does not judge pitch. It responds to vibration. An off-key shower rendition of a half-remembered song generates the same 15-fold nitric oxide spike, the same parasympathetic shift, the same endorphin release as a professional performance. The physiology does not require skill. It requires sound. Anyone who was told to stop singing, by a teacher, by a sibling, by a well-meaning parent who said they did not have the gift, was told to stop administering their own medicine. The gift was never the point. The vibration was the gift. Everyone had it. Some were told to put it away. Dunbar. The same Oxford group that measured the oxytocin response measured one more effect. And for anyone for whom pain is a daily companion, this one carries specific weight. Dunbar found that pain threshold increased significantly after choir singing. Blood samples confirmed elevated beta-endorphin, the endogenous opioid the body generates in response to sustained physical effort and rhythmic vocalization. Endorphin release from sustained singing was larger than that produced by equivalent duration of listening to music. Passive reception did not generate an equivalent response. The physical act of producing the sound, the muscular effort of breath support, the laryngeal vibration, the sustained engagement of the respiratory and vocal musculature, drove the endorphin response. The distinction is precise. A person listening to their favorite song through earbuds experiences emotional pleasure, dopamine in the reward circuitry. But the beta-endorphin elevation that raises pain threshold requires physical effort. The diaphragm working against resistance. the laryngeal muscles maintaining vocal fold tension, the sustained exhalation that a held note demands. Singing is physical labor performed by the respiratory and vocal musculature, and the body releases endorphins in response to sustained physical labor, regardless of whether that labor produces beautiful sound or not. Listening was not enough. The body needed to be doing the work. For the person whose mornings begin with stiffness, arthritic joints, back pain, the accumulation of decades of physical use, singing in the shower is not a trivial pleasure. It is beta-endorphin production through sustained vocalization, raising the pain threshold for the hours that follow. You may have noticed this without connecting it to the mechanism. Mornings when you sang in the shower felt different from mornings when you did not. The stiffness eased faster, the joints moved more freely, the first hour of the day was warmer and more mobile. Not the hot water. Both mornings had hot water. The singing morning added 10 minutes of sustained vocalization that generated endogenous opioids, and those endorphins circulating in the bloodstream raised the pain threshold for the hours that followed. Silence that replaced the singing when you decided not to do it anymore has measurable consequences for how much you hurt during the day. Now the question the physics forces: why does every human culture, without exception, include communal singing? No known human society lacks it. Religion, warfare, agriculture, mourning, celebration, the rearing of children. Every culture has placed singing at the center of its most important collective moments. Universality is total. Older than any surviving cultural artifact. Older than writing. Older than agriculture. Older than permanent settlement. Soldiers sang before battle, and the vagal stimulation optimized autonomic balance for the physical demands ahead, while the oxytocin bonded the unit into a group that would fight as one. Mothers sang to infants, and the shared respiratory rhythm entrained the infant's immature autonomic nervous system to the mother's more stable one, a co-regulatory mechanism that infant survival depended on. Work gangs sang in rhythm, and the cardiac entrainment synchronized their physical efforts, increasing the efficiency of coordinated labor. Mourners sang at funerals, and the endorphin release raised the pain threshold for the grief the group was entering together. Physics provides the explanation the traditions carried without articulating. Singing synchronizes the autonomic nervous systems of a group through shared vagal stimulation and synchronized breathing. It releases oxytocin without physical contact. It suppresses cortisol and activates immune function. It generates endorphins that raise pain threshold. It delivers nitric oxide to the cardiovascular system. Hymn and war chant and work song and lullaby were all running identical biochemistry, building a group of individuals into a physiologically bonded unit whose hearts beat together, whose immune systems were primed together, whose pain tolerance rose together, whose cortisol fell together. The singing was not decorating the event. The singing was the event. And here is what happened next. In the 20th century, something unprecedented, music became something you consumed rather than something you produced. Recording technology, radio, television, streaming, each innovation made listening easier and singing less necessary. The phonograph replaced the parlor piano. The radio replaced the family singing around it. The television replaced the communal evening. The earbuds replaced the car singing. Each step moved the voice further from the body and closer to the speaker. Generation now over 65 lived through the transition. Many of them grew up in households where people sang around pianos, at holiday tables, in churches where the congregation produced the music rather than listening to a performance. They watched the singing disappear from their own lives without understanding what was being lost, because what was being lost was invisible. The music was still available. The physiology was not. For 300,000 years, the only way to hear music was to make it. Every person sang. Not professionally. That distinction barely existed for most of human history. Not well. That was never the point. The point, which the biology reveals in retrospect, was that the act of singing was maintaining the vagal tone, the immune function, the pain threshold, and the cardiovascular parameters that the human body requires. What was lost was not the music. Music is more available now than at any point in human history. What was lost was the production of it. Listening to music does not vibrate the vocal folds, does not stimulate the vagus nerve through the larynx, does not drive the 15-fold nitric oxide spike, does not generate the endorphin response that sustained phonation triggers. Listening is passive reception. Singing is active physiology. The distinction is the difference between watching someone exercise and exercising. Humanity stopped singing in a single century. The vagal stimulation protocol that every human body ran for hundreds of thousands of years was replaced by passive listening within 3 generations. The body did not evolve to accommodate the change. It still requires the vibration. It still responds to the mechanical stimulus. There is a place where you used to sing alone. The shower. The car. The kitchen on a Saturday morning. Whatever it was and wherever it went. And for most people, it went gradually, replaced by earbuds that delivered other people's voices instead of their own. The physics of what happened there was not trivial. Every time your voice filled that space, your vagus nerve was being mechanically stimulated by the vibration of your own larynx. Your sinuses were releasing 15 times their resting nitric oxide. Your cortisol was dropping. Your endorphins were rising. Your body was doing, without instruction, without knowledge, without any awareness of the mechanisms, everything it knew how to do with the voice. Where you sang was not a place of performance. It was a place of self-administered physiology. Nobody needed to hear it. Nobody needed to judge it. The nerve does not care whether you are in tune. The sinuses do not care whether you know the words. The vagal stimulation runs on vibration, not on talent. Find it again.